high in the mountains of Central America, a peasant people called the Maya echo a fabulous ancient civilization. Some 5,000 miles away, a veteran English scholar-archaeologist has bridged the great gap between their forgotten world and ours and found honor in their land. For nearly 50 years, Dr. Eric Thompson has been cultivating what amounts to a love affair, a passionate involvement with a hidden civilization that flourished while Europe was still in the Dark Ages. Now in his 70s, Eric Thompson is hailed as the greatest living authority on the lost world of the Maya.
A Eric S. Thompson por su maravillosa aportación de la cultura maya al humanismo contemporáneo.
But the medals and the honors are only a part of the intensely personal rewards that his life's work has brought him.
You know, there used to be a song when I was a boy called I'm a constant lover, I fall in love with every girl. Well, I'm not going to say that at my age, but still I can fall in love with every Maya city almost.
So Eric Thompson took us on a jungle pilgrimage, a return to the Maya. The civilization of the Maya flowered 1,000 years ago on the strip of land that joins the two Americas, north and south, in the area where Mexico and Guatemala now meet. It emerged from humble origins to become a unique jungle civilization that grew up hidden in the tropical rainforests of the lowlands. From the air at first glimpse, it seems utterly incredible, a miracle, that deep in this impenetrable jungle should grow great stone cities like Tikal, the largest and most magnificent of Maya achievements. Coming by plane is the easy way now. But in the 19th century, when the first travelers and explorers came in search of a tale of lost cities, they had to hack their way through dense vegetation over some of the most hostile terrain in the world. After weeks of trekking, they were rewarded with a sight of storybook romance. Looming above the treetops, mysterious towers and steeples floating over the forest like a mirage. When Eric Thompson first came to Tikal, he came the hard way, like the first explorers, upriver by canoe from the coast, and then 5 uncomfortable days on muleback.
This is where the road that I followed when I came here for the first time in 1928. Mules staggered along here. In a way, it's almost like kind of pilgrimage, that you might be going to Rome or Reims, even to Canterbury, coming to see one of the great shrines of religion. Around here you've got the room where I slept the first time I came here to Tikal 44 years ago. I had my hammock here, slung up from those beam, went round the corner there. And I remember, you know, Tikal is supposed to be haunted according to local tradition. And I got up here and got into my hammock and there was a kind of crick, crick, crick noise. I thought, my gosh, maybe the place is haunted. And then after a bit, when my heart stopped beating too hard, I realized it was just the hammock was knocking against the wall behind you because it went round to the beam on the other side.
What made you choose this room?
Oh, well, just come and have a look at this view. Try and beat that. Huh? Pretty good, isn't it? And that, when I came here, there was a full moonlight, and it was really beautiful. The whole thing was bathed in moonlight.
And not just bathed in moonlight, but covered with scrub and climbing creepers after being abandoned to the forest for 1,000 years. Clearing the trees revealed that these steeple-like structures were actually huge pyramids crowned by temples, a scene of somber Gothic splendor even in ruin. Since the war, the University of Pennsylvania and the Guatemalan government have done a great deal of restoration work at Tikal and turned it into a showpiece of Mayan architecture. But the great central plaza, encompassed on all sides by temples and pyramids, represents only a fraction of the 6 square miles which the city originally covered.
Of course, when I came here 44 years ago, it was all covered with forest. And now you see it looks a bit like Central Park, New York, with the skyscrapers around it. But I sometimes like to think of it a third way, how it was, say, 1,000 years ago. And say it's that day of some big celebration, people pouring in here, perhaps for some big ceremony on the top and the crowd down below.
Despite its immense size, Tikal wasn't a city at all in our sense of the term. It was primarily a center for ceremony. The administrative and religious headquarters of the area where the people of the forests would congregate. Palaces and halls for king and court, temples and seminaries for priest and acolyte. For 6 centuries, from 300 to 900 AD, Tikal and her sister centers, Yaxchilan, Palenque, Quirigua, Copan, were the glory of the classic Maya period. It was a time when priest and ruler worked in harmony with a whole pantheon of gods to create an ordered society from the chaos of their surroundings. The grave face of the god. Complex intellectual abstraction in stone. The gods of the Maya represented every aspect of existence. Every day was a god, and every day dedicated to worship and propitiation of the god. And at the head, the god of gods, Itzamna, celestial monster who governed the universe. How extraordinary these Stone Age people were. It seemed nothing was beyond them. They could carve portraits from material intractable as flint. Total patience and preoccupation. A delicacy of style and touch unsurpassed anywhere in the world. The ruler governed by divine consent, aloof and godlike in himself. To him, representing the god, the people would make offerings of blood, willingly and stoically, blood rasped from their tongues with a cord of thorns. They honored his likeness in jade, not gold. The ruler enthroned, overwhelming authority, the classic Mayan profile serene and lofty, dwarfing the tiny subject figures at his feet. The king served and was served by the gods. The people gave service to the king. The craftsman served his art, order and authority, patience and preoccupation. And the priests served knowledge. Scholar priests who strove to understand the heavens and measure time itself. They wrote in hieroglyphs, picture symbols as complex and sophisticated as the concepts they were trying to express. The concept of zero, the concept of time, the concept of eternity. In this dignified and cultivated world, mythology had its own inevitable logic. The gods demanded more than lip service. They needed life as well. And the Maya people, schooled in unquestioning obedience, accepted ritual death as part of the natural order. In human sacrifice, the fantasies of legend became real. The ceremony took place at dawn, and that was the point and purpose of those temple-topped pyramids. It was living with today's Maya as a practicing archaeologist that gave Eric Thompson his deep insight into their past.
And my idea was you went out and had a few drinks to the Maya, you became much more friendly with them. Probably wasn't too good for your kidneys, but they kind of unbuttoned themselves when they really felt that you were a friend to them. Say, when I lived in their village and danced with the Maya girls, I think that put you in the picture much more than this rather detached view of the archaeologist poring over his potsherds.
It's not the potsherds, but the hieroglyphic writing that Eric Thompson pores over now. It's a baffling study that presents a constant challenge to Maya scholars. The hieroglyphs are like a code, concealing their meaning beneath layers of cryptic clues. Not much of this code has been broken yet, and the deciphering of a single hieroglyph may cost months of work. Only 3 books or codices have survived. The rest of the written records are in stone, but the problems are the same.
We're kind of lucky. We only have 26 letters in our alphabet. Of course, the Maya didn't have letters at all. There are various signs, and they had to have a large number of them. There were probably about 850 of them. And those about 370 are what we call main signs, and the rest of them are affixes. This particular glyph is the glyph for sun, for day, for festival, also happens to mean grasshopper. And in Maya it's called Keen. Now to put this into use, for instance, we want to say 8 days, we've got to add the number for 8. The Maya wrote by means of bars and dots. A bar represented 5. Like that. And 3 dots. There you have 8 keen.
Concepts were built up by means of affixes. The picture of a hand was a glyph for end. Affixed to the glyph for day or sun, it meant end of sun, or in other words, the west. Still using sun or keen as a basis, keen tun yab il means sun year fierce all the time, or fierce sun all year. In other words, drought.
The Maya sometimes, in order to jazz things up a bit, use the head of the sun god instead of the sun glyph itself. You notice he's got the sign for keen on his side of his face. He's squint-eyed, perhaps that's because looking at the sun, I don't know, and he has filed teeth. And you can proceed to do the same thing with this. If you want to say the day 4 keens, you just add 4 dots like that.
These endless mathematical calculations cover yards and yards of stone as the Maya sought to anchor themselves in time.
The Maya had trouble in expressing a number of abstract ideas. Some of them they got round by using rebus writing, you know, that kind of thing that kids do. You draw an eye in a tin can and some wavy lines to say, I can see. The Maya had trouble with the word for count, and they did a lot of counting. The word nearest they could find was the name for their shark, which in Maya comes very close to the English word. It's called shock. Shock is both shark and count. So they had used the picture of the shock fish. But it's a bit of a trouble to keep on carving a shark's head every time you want to use the word count. And the Maya was so hipped on numbers, they were counting all the time. But the way they got round that was this. The shark lives in water, so let's use water as a symbol. But there were difficulties there because the actual symbol for water is jade. These are one of the kind of complications you get in Maya writing. So what finally amounts to, they use the symbol for jade, which stands for water. Water stands for shark, and shark is shock, and shark stands for shock to count.
The most impressive collection of inscribed monoliths or stelae is at Kirigua. These magnificent soaring pillars, smothered with hieroglyphs, are the raw material for Eric Thompson's studies. The bland features of the rulers of Kirigua stare out from their stelae across what was once the great plaza of a lowland Maya city. Every 5 years a new stela was erected to celebrate the ruler's reign and to keep track of his own special place in time. Each ruler had to be keyed into a grid of time that not only looked far into the past, but into the future too.
Why were they so obsessed with understanding and recording time?
Well, I think it was very largely a question of divination, or everything related sooner or later to this special kind of old Moors almanac of theirs of 260 days. I was kind of insult to the Maya calendar to call it Old Moors Almanac because it was terribly important. It was everything in life depended on that, or what day you were born on and the number of the day. It kind of set your record for the rest of the life.
Now, you can read these hieroglyphs, or those of them which are decipherable, but to the layman, what one would be expecting from glyphs of this complexity is real information about people. And yet one doesn't get information about people, one simply gets information about time, which makes the Maya rather inaccessible.
Well, there was an old colleague of mine, Dr. Gann, who used to refer to this stuff, said these stelae have nothing but calendrical piffle. And there was a fair amount of what he said. For instance, here, this Quiriguá, we've got these tremendous calculations into the past. On monuments here, we've got dates going back, which I'm pretty sure, one case 90 million years into the past, and the other case 400 million years into the past. But to me, the Maya, there was really no beginning of time, I don't think.
Now, what about the ruler himself? Would he set this up, this stele, to glorify himself?
Partly, yes. I think he was in cahoots with the high priest, it was a kind of more or less a dual organization, with the high priest not theoretically alongside him, but really kind of one step lower down the ladder. And they worked together, and partly glorification of the ruler, you've got to keep him with him, but also the glorification of time and the gods.
It was sometimes hard to tell the difference. More and more the ruler would take on the attributes of the gods, even crowning his headdress with the image of the supreme god, the Itzamna. On the northwest fringes of this classic Maya world, the temple complex of Palenque brings us closer than anywhere else to the idea of kingship in action. For Palenque was quite literally built around a king.
There's been a lot of controversy in the past as to whether Maya civilization was independent or was influenced by the old world. And one of the great arguments was that Maya pyramids were flat on top and had temples on their tops and were not used for tombs, whereas in Egypt you had coming up to a point and were used for tombs. And that was seen a very strong argument that we Orthodox people used. And then about 18 or 20 years ago, my Mexican colleague, Alberto Ruz, working here for the Mexican government, was cleaning up this particular pyramid. And in the course of the work, lo and behold, he found a great big whacking tomb right underneath the bottom of the stairs here. And that, of course, really did put the cat among the pigeons, if we could say that.
But this is not the entrance.
Oh, no. You just had the great pleasure of going up to the top of there and then coming down again.
I was afraid of that.
Switch back.
Well, here goes then.
You notice, incidentally, that this darn climb of ours, there are no less than 9 terraces that we're climbing up on the staircase. And the Maya, they were just crazy about numbers. It's not only in these 9 terraces. Sometimes you find Maya buildings with 4 or 13. And they're both important to the Maya, but you've got to be careful because you can get hipped on Mayas yourself, on numbers. I had a friend of mine that archaeologist, and he started counting the spots in your tie and proving they represented something in the Maya calendar. So it's a question of watch the step, even if they are steep ones.
Yeah, considering how little they were, they really went in for steep steps, didn't they?
Well, that's true enough. Of course, one reason was that they used to send the sacrificial victims down from the top, bump them, let them go down, and they must have gone down with one heck of a bump, Yeah. And the congregation were down below there, and when the body arrived, certain ones had the right to cut him up and take part of the flesh as for kind of communion service.
I don't suppose the victim appreciated it, but it's a marvellous view once you've done the club.
Oh boy, it certainly is. Huh? That's one of the nice things about the Maya. I think that the high priest must have had good aesthetic senses.
Do we know much about the man who's buried here? He's lost his face and his reliefs.
No, we really know practically nothing about this man that we got down below. We don't even have the hieroglyph of his name. Well, when old Roos came along to work here, he, of course, there's all this covered with dust. He cleaned the dust off and he found some stoppers here, removed them, found these holes coming down here, and it was obviously to lift the slabs up. He did so, all covered with earth, and when he started to remove the earth, he found steps leading down into the interior of the pyramid. Just we're going to.
Enormously exciting.
Oh, you bet it was.
Like our Carter and Tutankhamun.
Yeah, of course he didn't find any gold down here, but he found plenty of jade, which after all for the Maya was more valuable. Not so vulgar either. But it's rather interesting, this little element here at the side, because that's a kind of pipe. It's been suggested it was to let the spirit of the dead person breathe. The air came right the way from the tomb up to the surface. And here you've got, of course, your corbel vaulting, just the same as in regular buildings. I've forgotten how many steps there are down here, but there are quite a few. In front of the entrance of the tomb, Roos found the remains of about 4 slaves who had obviously been sacrificed so their souls could accompany the soul of the ruler to the next world. And here, of course, is the triangular doorway that formed the entrance. And I think if you look at that, you'll admit it's a pretty magnificent sight.
Fantastic, isn't it?
It's a pretty impressive thing, isn't it, Magnus, this? Obviously, this tomb must have been made before the pyramid itself was built. It couldn't have been added afterwards.
On the massive sliding lid over the sarcophagus, a reclining figure almost surely of the king himself, and behind him the tree that grew from earth and pierced the 9 heavens.
And he was underneath here?
Yeah, he was right underneath there. And they're the same little holes to lift the lid up of the sarcophagus as in the entrance to the stairway upstairs.
But when do you reckon this was made?
Well, in the Maya calendar, it was about the end of the 13th Khartoum, which for us is about 690 AD.
And the king himself? Or the ruler?
Well, he was inside here, simply smothered in jade. And they had a wonderful jade mask laid over his face.
A buried king, aged between 40 and 50. Could this be a descendant seated on a throne of long-suffering subjects?
I suppose that the head chief himself might have been sitting more or less where I'm sitting here now. And I imagine him as possibly administering justice in such a place. Perhaps in front of him, the chiefs of the surrounding areas. He's right here. We have a hieroglyphic stairway with glyphs on it, the only one in the whole of Palenque, which adds importance to the place.
This would be the steps leading to the throne, then?
Yes, surely.
These murals, these would be the petty chiefs, would they?
Yes, and most of them, as you notice, have one hand or the other up on the shoulder, which is a Maya sign of humility or submission, or may even be peace.
Round this inner sanctum, cloisters with small dark rooms leading off them, damp and airless, scarcely fitting quarters for a king or his courtiers.
I think they were possibly used for certain periods of continence before a big ceremony, which we know the Maya had, and which were done in this type of building.
What about the tower, then? What was that for?
Well, nobody really knows. It's the only tower that exists in the whole Maya area. There are a whole lot of possibilities. I could imagine possibly somebody, the great big man himself, sitting up at the top there, appearing and speaking to the crowds, his young chiefs in these courts. Or another possibility is that, the Maya had a special ceremony at the end of every 52 years when they used to put out all the lights. There's a possibility the world would come to an end. And then the light was rekindled and the new fire was carried all over the country. Well, you can imagine having that ceremony up at the top of the tower there, be visible for miles around, and the people would know they were okay for another 52 years.
But the serenity of the Maya world couldn't last forever. From the anonymity of time, a name begins to emerge in the hieroglyphs. Shield Jaguar, ruler of Yash-Chilan, boasting of his conquests. It's our first inkling of violence amongst the Maya. It was at Chichen Itza, most celebrated and grandiose of all the Maya sites, that the invasion, when it came, had the most traumatic effect. Chichen Itza had had its share of peace and tranquility during the long summer of the Classic period. But around the year 1000 AD, it was violently interrupted. Toltec warriors came sweeping in from central Mexico, a tough and ruthless people. The Maya were overwhelmed. They brought with them a new and cruel cult, the feathered serpent, who took his fierce place alongside the older gods. And now, for the first time in a Maya city, death itself became a major cult. For the first time, a morbid obsession with the symbols of mortality. The great central pyramid, the Castillo, was used by the new Toltec Maya as a place where sacrifice came closer to slaughter.
Oh, yes. I don't think there was much doubt that right here the people were sacrificed. They'd have had a little round kind of milestone. Victim laid his back on it, hands and feet held by 4 assistants. Old priest comes up and cuts open the breasts and takes the heart out. And then the body taken to the edge, dumped over the edge and goes tearing down all the way down to the bottom, rolling over and over.
The Maya, in common with all the peoples of Central America, played a curious and desperately hazardous kind of ball game. At Chichen Itza, the ball court was enormous, like a football stadium. The players, heavily padded for protection, used a solid rubber ball which they could only strike with hip or thigh. The object was to shoot the ball through a stone ring set high in the sidewall, and for the loser, the result could be fatal.
Apparently it was a custom sometimes to cut off the man's head. You can see where his head is being cut off, and the blood is spurting out in the form of, I think it's 7 rather weathered snakes. And then down on the left, you can see the way the man that beat him is holding up his head there. It's a pretty fearsome ending to what should really have been a sporting event.
They seem to have been an extraordinarily brutal and violent people, the Maya, at this stage of their history.
Oh, very definitely, yes. And there is some evidence or grounds for thinking that civilizations, the older they get, the more brutal they tend to get and get more and more involved in war. And with that goes greater brutality.
The great Temple of the Warriors with its ranks of pillars, each one depicting a Toltec warrior in full military regalia. These stone soldiers form a guard of honor round the stairway that leads to the inner sanctum. Here reclined a Toltec jaguar god, holding up his begging bowl for offerings of blood. The rain gods were called Chaks. They inhabited the sky. The Maya liked them, liked to buy their favors with favors in return. But they also lived in water. And 200 yards from the main plaza at Chichen Itza lay the huge sacred well or cenote. Here the Chaks were offered the ultimate votive gift, a human sacrifice, and the victim was often a child.
I see a procession coming along, the principal character, a small child, being made to cry because his tears, by sympathetic magic, are going to bring the raindrops from on high. The Maya were very affectionate parents. They didn't throw their own children in. There was a regular system by which they bought orphans from other groups. Well, they should trade as they're being brought to market, and they'd buy these children, keep them around their house for some time, and then when there was a need, time of drought and like that, water was needed, well, the child was sacrificed. It wasn't their own, therefore they didn't feed it so much. The procession would come along and halt on the south side of the cenote where the platform is. The child would be taken right up to the top and then thrown into the water.
The Maya had now reached the end of almost 2,000 years of civilization. Tulum is a tiny settlement compared with the other ceremonial centers, looking out towards the Atlantic from the east coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. It's said that this was the first town that Cortez saw when he came here in the 16th century from the Old World on his mission of conquest. He didn't stop here. He sailed right round the Yucatan Peninsula and into central Mexico, where he spent the next 2 years subduing the Aztec with a characteristic blend of violence and treachery. Only then did the Spaniards turn their attention to the now degenerate remnants of the Maya.
The attack came from the south, both sides of the peninsula. The Maya suffered terribly, first of all, and then they learned to use guerrilla warfare. And that was held up things, but didn't succeed in stopping the Spaniards. And all through the 30s, they were fighting very hard. And then the final collapse came in 1540, which, I think it's a year or so before poor old Anne Boleyn lost her head. And then after that, subduing the country went ahead very quickly. One Maya group, to their shame, went over to the Spanish side. But I don't think anyhow they could have resisted the gunfire and the horses of the Spaniards. They were scared to death of horses.
There's an air of melancholy and decay about Tulum that isn't altogether recent.
This was really a kind of whitened sepulchre, where the masonry was badly made, and compared with, say, other sites like the veneer masonry at Chichen, it's perfectly miserable. And they just covered it over with dollops of stucco, smooth things out. And everything is miserable here. The pottery is no good at all. And these little tiny buildings, they look as though they're made for dwarfs.
It's an ordinary thing, isn't it? They're so small.
Yeah. That may
were for midgets.
Well, I don't think that, no. I don't think they could have shrunk as their glory shrank.
And so the world of the Maya came to an end. It only took a company of soldiers, beardless youths in fact, not many more than 100 of them in all. But they were too much for the Maya, as they'd been too much for the Aztec. There was some sporadic, isolated resistance to the Spaniards for a time. It even flickered on in remote areas until the end of the 17th century. But by then the Maya were utterly finished. And it stayed that way until modern archaeology rediscovered their lost world and started to piece it together again. the subjugated Mayan peasants donned their Spanish masks and promoted their conquerors into their ritual dances along with the deer. But their culture had been hopelessly undermined.